right, excellent. Thank you. Good morning, all of you. I see there's a fairly large number of people who made it to the seminar in spite of the compulsions these days to be at the ATM queue or the bank every morning. It's encouraging to see that. I just want to start out by saying that in my 22 years in sales and marketing, the most difficult conversations I ever got into were negotiation conversations. And the reason for that is that negotiations, by their nature, leave very little room, for the seller particularly to maneuver. And that's why this subject is so interesting, and that's why we actually delved into figuring out what would be a good structure that one could think of before getting into a negotiation conversation to come out on the winning side most of the time, if not all of the time. Before I get into that, though, I just want to talk briefly about Strat2 Results, which is the company that I represent. We are primarily in the area of driving sales excellence, which we break up into two parts. We believe most organizations spend a lot of time building excellence amongst their sales professionals through skilling and through tools and through methodologies that they put in their that they provide to them, but many of them often miss out on the area of building a good, strong sales operation. That's like building a beautiful house without much of a foundation underneath it. We spend a lot of time working with companies on helping them build sales operations. But building sales operations is really still only a framework. And once you've got the framework in place, you've got to take that to the market. And so the second big area that we focus on is how do we execute the blueprints that people have created for sales or for operational needs, whatever they may be. And so execution is the second area that we work in. That necessitates sometimes looking at the skill sets in the organization. We don't necessarily go out independently working on training programs, but when the need arises in a client where we're doing a consulting project, we will get into areas like how to help the sales people or the marketing people create customer value, how to do strategic negotiations, which is the topic for today's discussion, how to help first-time managers become more effective, and of course, how to work with leadership to create better business results. That was the whole idea, the premise of starting Strat2 Results, and I'm happy to say that our objective of trying to drive nonlinear results as opposed to incremental year-by-year growth has shown some good impact in the years that we've been at work. Here are some examples of companies that have seen results from the work that we do. We've been able to grow revenues at a industrial automation company by 2x year over year in the last 3 years. That's been one of the big successes of the execution, the execution work that we do. We've also worked with Europe's largest engineering company across the country, across all their divisions. They had a big customer satisfaction issue 2 years back. They had a net promoter score of 19. They wanted to double that in 2 years. It went up to 43 in 2 years, and this year it's gone up to 57. And so that's also fairly nonlinear in the kind of growth that we've done. Worked with a manufacturing company in the automotive component space where we were able to help them increase their 4 walls profit from 14 to 20%. The issue with this company was it's one of the 5 plants in the world, and it wasn't very profitable, and quality issues persisted, and it was one of the smaller plants. So the parent unit was saying, do we really even need the plant in India? So some good results out there. This is just a brief introduction to the kind of work we do at Strat2 Results, and now I'd like to start to focus on, of course, on the subject at hand, which is here, the strategic negotiations piece, and talk about what objectives we are trying to achieve with this initiative. I did say at the beginning that negotiation conversations don't leave much room for maneuver, and so you've got to create that space yourself. I mean, it's terrible to enter a negotiation meeting if you're unprepared or you're less prepared than a customer. But most importantly, if you don't have too many options and too many spaces that you can move into to help the cause of the negotiation that you're trying to drive. Unfortunately, you have to drive that. You have to drive the nego. And if the customer starts driving it, then it starts getting narrower and narrower, and it doesn't give it doesn't give us the space to get the best out of the negotiation that we could get ourselves. So it requires the use of creativity. It requires a flexible framework in which to do this work. It just helps you gain more confidence as you get into the negotiation. Now, my objective, therefore, is to discuss three things. How do we create the strategic depth for us to be able to move from one level to another level to a third level and then back to the second or the first, and basically play a dance as we get into the negotiation, and the customer keeps coming back at us with in trying to narrow things down and close them out as we go. The framework comes from a company called Think Inc., which is a partner of ours that is based out of the United States. Think Inc. has based its model. In fact, the founders of Think Inc. were people who came from the team that created and ran and tested the Harvard negotiation model back in the 1980s. And we really like the approach that they have. So we tied up with the company and we represent them in India. Their model talks about three levels of strategic depth in negotiations. The first is, it is imperative for us to understand the consequences to both parties, the buyer and the seller, if there's no agreement in the negotiation. The second is, once you do understand what are the consequences on both sides, then what is it that's being negotiated, and what are the areas in which you can trade? Customers will normally want to go to a specific area to trade. You'll normally want them to have a look at the holistic picture, which they might not see, and so therefore create a series of areas in which you can create trades. And the third is that if you're not being able to move forward in spite of the trades that you've prepared for, and in spite of understanding clearly what the consequences of no agreement in the negotiation are, then it might be a great idea to actually go into the negotiation with not just one offer, but multiple equal offers. And as the negotiation takes shape and as the negotiation takes direction, you can keep moving between what's the offer you're making, what's the consequence of no agreement for the customer there, what are you trying to trade, and if the trade gets stuck, can I go back to what is the consequence of not having the agreement on that particular trade, or move on to a different offer. So for the time being, at a high level, let's just say there are three levels of strategic depth that we look at as we create a plan for negotiating a deal. The first is consequences of no agreement. I will often refer to that with a three-letter acronym, CNA. The second is, what are the trades that are available to us? And the third is, what are we anchoring down on? I mean, where do we see the impact of these CNAs and the trades, which is in the multiple equal offers that we take out to the customer. Many of us make a mistake believing that negotiation is an event. The fact is, negotiation is no longer an event. In the world that we live in today, there's so much information available to everybody. Very often, customers end up being far better prepared than sellers before they two meet in a negotiation agreement. So there are all kinds of things out here. There's the customer selection criteria. What is it? Do we know? Do we not know? Have we tried to find out? What's the data that's underlying that criteria? What are the facts? What's the sales process in the customer's organization? Then comes the negotiation, and the closure. Unfortunately, many of us enter here. If you wait too long, I mean, if you wait to go into the negotiation at the stage when the negotiation is happening, it's already too late. And so we, very clearly recommend that you need to integrate the selling process with the negotiation process. It's the same old process because it's simply about being better prepared, having more options, creating more space when you're getting into the negotiation. I've often found that a byproduct of that is when you've got a clear blueprint on what game you're playing in the negotiation with the customer. That's your game. The customer doesn't know it, and that helps you control the direction of the negotiation to a very large extent. The customer will keep pulling it back to what his framework is, but the skill lies in, having a much better preparation with the customer's data and your own data, and therefore catching the customer's attention and therefore leading him down the path that you want him to go, and not always going down the path that the customer wants to lead you. So we strongly recommend that that the processes are that the selling process and the negotiating process are integrated, and the negotiation process is not seen as a process that is taken up after a sale has been effected, and it's not seen only as a price negotiation or a terms negotiation, because at the end of the day we sold some value to the customer. That's why he's negotiating with us. The negotiation process, if it's integrated, prevents the erosion of that value. And for that, we say, you need to create blueprints for the negotiation that you're getting into. What's a blueprint? A blueprint basically is a course of action that you want to create that is embellished and strengthened with information that's favorable to you, and in many cases favorable to the customer as well in the negotiation. Because by using this framework, you often add, in fact, always add a great deal of value to the customer himself, and we'll discuss that as we go on. Let's look at the components of the blueprint. We talked about the consequences of no agreement. There is a consequence of no agreement on both sides. There is a consequence if you don't have an agreement on the negotiation to the seller. There is also a consequence of no agreement to the buyer. So the first part is that there is a seller CNA and there is a buyer CNA. It's two parties that are negotiating, and therefore there are two parts to it. The second, of course, is there are some things that I, as a seller, may be willing to trade, and there are some things that are not negotiable. The same holds true for the customer. There are some things that the buyer will be willing to negotiate and trade with you on, and there are some that he will not. And the third that brings these things together is, if we understand what are the consequences of no agreement on both sides, and we understand what is the priority and what is the range of the trades that people are willing to make, it just enables us as sellers to create the anchors, which we call the multiple equated options, and to take those to the customer in the negotiation with his point of view regarding how far is he going to go in the negotiation on his trades, how far is he going to go in the negotiation as far as the consequence of no agreement is concerned on his side, and similarly on our side. So the multiple option actually includes, or each of the options actually includes aspects from both the seller side and the buyer side. So there are three things. There's the CNA, there's the trade, and there are the multiple options. Now let's have a look at these things. What's a consequence of no agreement? How do we consider a consequence of no agreement? How do we identify a CNA on our side and on the other side? We really need to understand that very clearly. What really is going to happen? And I have a little framework here that says, how would you do this? Now, for this, I'm going to use a case. Let me give you an overview of that case. The seller is a company that's currently running a plant that produces non-corrosive or non-corrodable stainless steel pipes, and they produce these for the building and construction industry. They want to exit this business. They have found that when they did an assessment of the value of their plant, the value of that plant was about $10 million. They also have some patents in that area, and those patents are valued at about $4 million because they have an offer from somebody to buy those patents. They have all the regulatory approvals for running the plant, and they have a team of employees that's well versed with running this business. But they want to exit, and the primary focus for this seller is that I want to exit as a whole. I don't want to be selling the plant separately, and I don't want to be selling the patents separately, and I don't want my people to lose jobs and stuff like that. So that's the seller's situation. On the other hand, there's a buyer who's entering the business and they want to create similar kinds of pipes for a different application. They want to use this application in the in the airline industry. Now their option is as follows. They've seen a piece of land pretty close to their office, just about a few miles. They need to make a decision on buying it quickly, but here are some of the factors that are impacting that decision. If they create the plant, if they build the plant on that plot of land, it's going to cost them $25 million, and it's going to take them 12 months. After they do that, they're going to have to hire new employees and train those employees on whatever they have to do. They're going to have to go out there and get all the all the legal and the compliance issues sorted out. And so it's going to take them a good 12 to 15 months to actually start production. They have seen the plant of this company that's looking to sell it, and they're interested. So now let's look at what is the seller's consequence to no agreement in this scenario, and what is the buyer's consequence to no agreement in this scenario. What happens if the seller is unable to convince the buyer? It's very simple. He's going to have to sell somewhere else. Right? Now, that's easier said than done, because if you analyze the CNA and you analyze what's the impact of this, this impact is worth about $7 million in revenue to this client. The reason I'm saying $7 million is, although this plant is valued at $10 million, it'll have to be refitted to meet the client's, to meet the buyer's requirement, because he's going to make the same products but for a different industry, and that's going to cost about $3 million. So the total impact on revenue is $7 million. It's going to take 6 months and $3 million to do the refits, whatever they are, and there are, of course, patents worth $4 million that I would dearly like to sell as a seller, because after I've sold the plant, those patents are not of much value to me. Right? Yes, it's true that I can wait for about a year and potentially see if the value goes up to $5 million, $6 million and sell it further. But truly, you know, that's not how I would like to make the sale. I'd really like to make the sale as a turnkey one-off project. And of course, I'm interested in ensuring that the employees in my organization move along with the plant and the machinery and the patents to the new ownership. So this is the impact of the consequence of no agreement. The consequence of no agreement itself is I sell elsewhere. Now there could be other consequences too. You'd have to find a new buyer. That would take time, and this company actually believes that they can only run this plant for another 1 year at break-even levels. After that, they'll have to start. They'll incur losses on running the business. There will be others, but I'm just saying that these are the core quantifiable analysis or the key things that will be the result of a consequence of no agreement for the seller. Now let's look at the buyer side. If the buyer does not buy for $7 million or whatever it is, the buyer will have to build the plant themselves. Now, if you look at the analysis and the impact of that consequence of no agreement, it means that they're going to have to incur an expense of $25 million. It's going to take them 12 months to complete. It's going to take 9 months of opportunity cost, 6 months for the refit, and potentially another few months for things like hiring and training employees and getting all the government permits they might want. But the good thing is this plant is only 10 miles away. Whereas the plant, let's assume the plant of the seller company is a larger distance away. In the case that I'm reading off, it's actually about 7 times that much. But look at the risk. You got to assess the risk. Is the business that I'm going to get out of this plant going to cover itself if I actually go out and spend $25 million, spend 12 months, wait for any revenue to show up for for 9 months, as opposed to buying something off the shelf, getting into business in 6 months, on a plant that costs $7 million and potentially buy patents worth $4 million. Where the only difference is that while the land I have is 10 miles away, whereas the plant that is in a position to be bought is 70 miles away. These are the analysis and consequences. These are the issues that will come up when you actually get into the negotiation. So let's move a little bit further from here. Now we understand what the CNA is. The buyer is actually interested only in the plant, because the buyer sees that his ability to produce the products that he needs to do will be achieved by buying the plant. He's not so interested in the patents. Now, patents will help them produce some product for which the plant already has capacity. Can probably generate about $6-7 million worth of revenue, but it's not aligned with it's not really aligned with with their business objectives. So they see the business, or they see their opportunity as an opportunity to buy the plant, where the seller is seeing this as a $7 million revenue opportunity, though he would like to sell the $4 million of patents. The buyer is seeing this as an opportunity of $25 million of expense of building the plant themselves versus a $7 million purchase of the plant. And so the space that they're playing in is basically $18 million. Now, this is where the point that I had made earlier, that negotiations are by their very nature don't leave much room for for maneuver comes in. If we are looking at one thing, which is the purchase and the selling of the plant, and we are looking at the total value in between as being $18 million, then we are restricting ourselves to just one option, and we are restricting ourselves to creating value worth $18 million. How is this value? This is the value that the two can share, because the seller can get $7 million to whatever it is, within the scope of $18 million. Seller is not going to give the buyer, the buyer is not going to give the seller more than $25 million. The buyer also knows that the seller, the seller's plant value currently is $10 million. So the buyer is going to try to keep as much of the $25 million that he has, and the seller is going to try and take, the buyer is going to try and keep as much of the $18 million that he can, and the seller is going to try and take away as much of the $18 million that he can. So that's the value in which you in which you'll end up playing. So we're going to start looking at ways on how to increase this value. At the moment, let's just say we understand the CNAs and we understand what's the value that's getting created. What are the key points of consequences of no agreement? Why do we want to understand the consequence of no agreement? Because the first thing is, only if both sides are getting a better deal, right, which is better than the alternative that they have. The alternative for the seller being, I'll have to go and sell to someone else. The alternative for the buyer being, I'll have to build this myself. If the buyer gets a better deal, then I'll have to build this myself, and the seller gets a better deal, then I have to go and sell to somebody else. That's when they will, that's when they will crack the deal. So the deal will only happen if both sides clearly know what's their baseline and how much better they are getting from it. Our objective as sellers primarily, and I'm talking essentially from the sell side, our objective as a seller is to ensure that, at the lowest possible risk, are we being able to create the maximum value vis-a-vis the customer's alternative. Now you see, in each of these points, you'll see why the CNA is so important. Because if we don't clearly identify the alternative, we won't know what's above the alternative and what's below the alternative, and therefore whatever offer we make could end up being less than the alternative that the customer has. And then the customer will not buy. That's why it's important to do that baselining. Another important reason is that it's not necessary that the customer is using this kind of a framework or any framework at all, right? It's true that customers don't often understand a consequence of no agreement. Also, sometimes they will try to underplay it, or they will create numbers of facts just to throw you off and get something better. They haven't really done the evaluation. But if you have, that puts you in a pretty strong position with respect to what is the customer's, what is the customer's consequence of no agreement. If you know that better than the customer, it just gives you a much, much stronger position. It's also a good idea to see who are the stakeholders. It's important to understand what power they wield in the organization. We also need to see what's the information that we want to collect, and the reason for that is very simple. And that reason is that power comes from the consequences of no agreement. Here's what I mean. If the consequence of no agreement between the seller and the buyer, if that consequence is lower for the seller, then the seller has the power. If the consequence of not agreeing on a negotiation point is higher with the buyer, then the buyer has the power. Now, it really creates a very clear picture in our minds of what's the power equation between ourselves and the buyer if we are selling. And the importance of that, of course, is simply this. If you are in an advantageous position and you have more power, you have the capacity to push harder and get the better deal. If the buyer has more power, because the consequence of no agreement to him is lesser than the consequences to you, then he has the power, and he will take the he will take the lion's share of the value that gets created in between. And that's the reason, that's the key reason why it's so important to create the consequence of no agreement clearly on both sides. So a good CNA analysis is basically a great way of ensuring, it's a great thing to have on your side to ensure that you don't get commoditized. Now, commoditized means what? Everybody's offer is the same. Somebody's offering it cheaper, and I'll buy it from whoever is the cheapest. Unless you understand the CNA well, the consequence of no agreement to the buyer well, from your point of view, you get commoditized. So those are those are some key points to keep in mind when you're looking at CNA. Which brings us to a very logical point, saying how do I create the CNA? How do I analyze the CNA for both sides? It's a little bit of an inexact science, because you sometimes don't have specific numbers, or sometimes numbers change because of market conditions and what competitors are doing and so on. However, there is a method, and I want to share that method with you. What's the likely CNA if there's no negotiation for us? As a seller, it's very simple. If there's no consequence, if the consequence to no agreement is, for us, it simply means that we're going to lose the opportunity. Somebody else is going to take it, or the customer will do nothing, or the customer will do it themselves. So the customer has three options here. They're in a good position. I mean, for us, it's simply a matter of losing the opportunity or not. For the customer, they may choose to do nothing, scrap the project. They may go to somebody else, or they might do the project themselves. So they have they have three options. How do we collect data for this? Because that's what's really eventually going to tell us where we are at with this whole game. So collecting the data on CNA impact is on the side of the seller is really in two areas: hard costs and soft costs. And what are the benefits? Are they positive or are they negative? Let's not get into specific numbers. Let's just say, is it positive? In which case we write down a plus. Is it negative? In that case we write down a minus. For a customer, the consequences of no agreement. Remember, we are building this consequence of no agreement. It is not the customer who's building it. We are building it. So when we build the CNA for the customer, we should be looking at what are the criteria they should use to evaluate us. That gives us the opportunity of bringing in a number of the areas where we have advantages, but it also has the opportunity of evaluating ourselves where we don't. Right? It's a good idea to then go and rank that by importance. HML stands for high importance, medium importance, and low importance. So two key things that we look at: what's the criteria that the client should evaluate us against our alternatives or other people that are in the game, our competitors, and rank them in importance to the customer. Is it high importance to the customer, medium importance to the customer, or low importance to the customer? And then go out and see, by marking a plus or a minus, to analyze what are the differentiators and risks that we have compared with the alternative. That gives us the space to be able to go and say, what are the buttons I want to push? What are the areas I want to emphasize in the negotiation conversation? It's obvious that if I don't have these, if I don't have this analysis in front of me, and I don't understand what's important for the customer, how important it is for the customer, and what's good or positive on my side and what's not, it's going to be hard for me to just push on to push a conversation on anything other than price, right? So how does this look? This is just a sample. This sheet is not from the buyer-seller example that we used earlier, and this sheet is one that talks about our CNA, the analysis of our own CNA. What's positive and what's negative on our side? What is the impact on us if there is no deal with the customer? So there are a number of parameters on the left-hand side, on the hard cost side and the soft cost side. These parameters will change by case. So we don't have a set list of things saying please evaluate against this. You'll have to create this list when you're doing it. Right? So what are the hard costs for us? What are the soft costs for us? And are we positive on these or are we negative on these? And therefore, what is the impact if there is no deal with the customer? This is how we create it for our side. So we understand where we are positive, where we are negative ourselves, if there is no deal, that if there's no agreement that we reach with the customer. Then we build one for the other side, for the customer side. And here's what it could look like, right? What's the other side's consequence to no agreement, right? Will they go to competition? Will they do it themselves, and so on? So again, on the hard and soft cost side, now we've got two columns here. Sorry, three columns here. One that says what's the criteria. So for instance, who provides better customer service is one of the criteria. How important is that to the customer? Is that of high importance, medium importance, or low importance? And in this case, in this sheet, it says it's of high importance. And then we mark out on the right-hand side, is this an area of strength for us or not? Now you see how this gives you the singular opportunity where when you're having this discussion with the customer, you could easily go and start pushing on better customer service, because that's of high importance to the customer and it's a strength for you vis-a-vis whoever your alternative is, right? So that's the way you could potentially build out the other side's CNA. These two sheets will then give you a fairly comprehensive view of not just the high level of the consequence, which in our case would be lose the deal, or in the customer's case could be go to the competition or build it themselves, but it also gives us the underlying data to say, I don't want to lose the deal, and I don't want the customer to go to my competition or to do it themselves. I'd rather have them ask me to do the job, and therefore, here are the buttons that I'm going to press. These are the things that I'm going to get into the conversation. Now, you can do this. A lot of people actually do this in their normal negotiation conversations. I don't deny that. But the fact is that when we start putting the three things together, CNA, trades, and multiple equated options, you'll begin to see the power of this. So just bear with me for a little while as I move forward and get into those areas and draw the parallel on these things. Just a moment. Okay, why do we care about CNA in our negotiations? Let's have a look at a few points here. I think, the main point here is, I'd really emphasize on this. Where does the power lie? Right? If we can identify where the power lies, it really helps us to take the conversation in a direction that would be mutually beneficial to both the parties, to me as well as to the customer, and help me get the maximum out of the value that I see and the value that I create. And the customer, of course, needless to say, will also get it. The other points are important as well. For example, what's the probability that the negotiation will end up favorably? Right? If you don't know the consequence of no agreement to the customer, the likelihood or the probability of the negotiation ending favorably in your in your favor is directly proportional to that. The less you know, the less likely it will end in your favor. The more you know, the more likely it will end in your favor. It also, by collecting this information and putting it into the formats that I shared with you, helps you understand your differentiators, helps you understand your strengths, your risks, and how you're going to mitigate those risks in the conversation with the customer. Of course, eventually, tactically speaking, it also helps you understand what's the information that's still missing, and helps you create a plan on how to get that information. So that's the first part of it, consequence of no agreement. Just to summarize that very quickly, let's clearly understand at a high level what's the consequence of no agreement, and then at a low level, what's the analysis of that? What are the various aspects of that no agreement that come into play that can be measured, and that could be important to the key players in the business or in the negotiation. Then let's move to trades. Now we know what the consequence of no agreement and the analysis of that consequence of no agreement is to the client as well as to us. Let's look at trades. Let's look at what's being negotiated. For this, I'll again take the support of the case that I'd mentioned earlier. What really is being negotiated in that case? We're discussing, the desired terms of the seller and the buyer. The seller wants to achieve his desired terms. The buyer wants to achieve his desired terms. The first thing to do is to understand what those desired terms are, how important are they to both the parties, therefore what is the priority, and what is the range that we can play in. Because if we understand those things, then then we will avoid situations where we are trying to negotiate a particular thing with a client that's of high importance to us, but the client doesn't really care about it, or vice versa. The client is negotiating something with me that's of immense importance to him, but just because it's not in my priority list, therefore I don't want to negotiate on it, and I become a bull and absolutely say this is not negotiable. You know what that negotiation ends up being, right? So it's important to get those things. What are we going to talk about here on the seller desired terms, which is our side of the desired terms? What are those things that we are discussing? What is their priority to us, and what is the range within which we are willing to play? So, price of the plant was one of those things. I'm expecting the price of the plant to return me something between $7 million to higher than $7 million, up to whatever is the space that I'm playing, the value that was there. Remember, the value is what? 25 million is what it's going to cost the customer. 7 million is what it's going to, what I'm expecting. The value is 25 minus 7. That's the room to play in. So how much of the additional $18 million can I get? While at the same time, how can the customer feel good about not spending $25 million, spending a lot less than that, but giving me the maximum that I can get? So the priority for me, the price of the plant, the priority is number one. And the range I'm looking at is $7 million to something higher than $7 million, up to the value that we have determined in the CNA. The second thing that's a priority to me is I want to get rid of this plant quickly, and I think that the fastest I can get rid of, given the opportunity I have of having to refit the plant, is 6 months. So my time to revenue is 6 months, and so I'm looking at anything between X number of months to 6 months as a range for that. For me as the seller in this case, priority number 3 is to sell the patents. And the price of the patents that I'm looking at is $4 million upwards. Why $4 million? Because I already have an offer for $4 million from somebody. I would ideally like to take this up to $7 million because that's the extent to which the value of the products that come from this patent can be monetized. So I'm looking at somewhere between $4 to $7 million. That's priority number 3 for me. And priority number 4 for me is to make sure that my employees are getting absorbed in the new business, so I can hand it over as a turnkey project. Because if it's not turnkey, all kinds of issues come up. Some things will require you to be engaged for a period longer than 6 months, maybe. So these are the 4 top priorities for me, and the ranges within which we are looking at. From the buyer's perspective, what are the priorities and what are the ranges? Now you'll see some differences come up here. The buyer's priority is I want to make a purchase of this plant from anywhere from X million dollars, but my outside limit is $25 million. So you could say 0 to 25. Priority number 1 for the client and for us matches, at least from a priority perspective. It may not be from a range perspective, but from a priority perspective, it matches. The second thing that matches is priority number 2, which is the amount of time that it takes. For me, I'd like to get out of this in 6 months as the seller, and the client would like to see, would also like to get tracking as soon as possible. But his range is from 0 months to 12 months, whatever it takes for me to get my production started and reduce my opportunity cost. If you look at the third one, I'd said earlier, the buyer is only interested in the plant. And so for the plant, he wants to make sure that he gets the right price in the right time frame, and that he gets a trained workforce rather than have to hire people and to train them up to do this job. So his priority number 3 is the trained workforce. It is not the price of the patents, right? I've kept this simple. I've said for the client, the priority number 4 is price of the patents, X to $7 million. I know I have an offer for $4 million. The client knows that the potential for that market, for the products that we create, even though they don't really want to get into it, is worth $7 million if they just use the capacity of the plant. So here, we see a clear picture as we look at the things that we want to trade or that we are willing to trade on. Is the 4 key things that, or rather the key negotiation areas, the things that we are negotiating on, is the price of the plant, the time that it's going to take to get the plant running for the new company, the price of the patents, and the people that are involved, because that just saves us time to get into to start manufacturing the new product as soon as possible. This is where we start thinking about creating value. Why I'm saying this is, what is the client interested in? The client is interested primarily in buying the plant. So the discussion is going to be what? How much will I pay for the plant? But there are a lot of other things in my interest. For example, what happens to my patents? For example, what happens to my people? And therefore, I start using some of these things that that we have in our repertoire to try and start enhancing the value, and therefore creating a larger pool from which the client can take away and from which I can take away. That's the whole concept of creating value. So we already know that if it's only the plant that we are discussing, I will sell the plant at 7 million. The client will buy the plant at anywhere from $7 million to $25 million, whatever it is. So the value that we share between us is $18 million. That's it. Now that's what creates a sense of being boxed in, because there is only one thing we are discussing, and the value that one thing that we are discussing is whatever it is. It's $18 million in this case. And that's the reason we say, what if you looked at a plant plus patents kind of an option, and you said, I can sell my plant at $7 million, and I can sell the plant plus, or rather, I can sell the patent value at $4 million. So I'm putting my ticker up from $7 million to $11 million. The client is, now I'm making the client see $25 million, which is the value he would have to pay for building his plant, and $7 million in the patent rate. 25 plus 7 is 32, and 32 minus 11, which is what 7 plus 4 is $21 million. I just created $3 million of additional value from which I can take some part and the client can take some part. And I just created another option for discussion with the client. So I have removed the boxing in that happens by one point of discussion, which is just the value of the plant, and I have enhanced the value at the same time by creating new options. Let's build on this a little bit and get a little bit more into looking at trades. And let's look at understanding the key points of what the trades are. Everybody is looking for value. When we get stuck on a particular subject and we don't look at what's around it and what you can sort of how you can enhance it, you're not going to create value. I use an example very, very frequently. And I'll use it here. It's a B2C example, but I'll show you how value gets created. Let's take any movie that's got released recently. I don't know, maybe, I'm not much of a movie buff, so the last one I've heard about is MS Dhoni. Right. Now, MS Dhoni is a movie, it's a product. I could choose to go and see MS Dhoni at a theater. I might choose to go and see MS Dhoni at a theater in which the ticket costs 70 rupees. On the other hand, I might also go and choose to see MS Dhoni at a theater where the ticket costs 300 rupees. The product is the same. Why do I pay 300 rupees to a PVR, for example, and pay 70 rupees to a non-PVR type of single screen theater? The reason I do that is because PVR, in addition to MS Dhoni, the movie, which is exactly the same product in both the theaters, has added a great deal of value around it. And that value is what? Higher quality of sound and picture, better quality of people. I get food served on the, Coke and popcorn, whatever it is served at my seat. The air conditioning works. There's cleanliness. The bathrooms are clean. There are 5 other things to do in the mall. See, it's not, if you had left it to the product, if you had said, listen, I am PVR, please come and see MS Dhoni. And somebody else had said, I'm, let's say, Liberty and come and see MS Dhoni. You would have questioned, why are you charging 300 rupees, whereas the other guy is charging me 70 rupees? It's because that guy has created that value. He's created that additional value that you have bought into. And that's why it's important to look at trades and see, how much more value can we create. This kind of logic applies in virtually every business. Right? So, we're talking focus and just to expand it, all of us say that a Maruti Alto does the same job as a Mercedes 500 SL does. Why do people pay so much money for a Mercedes 500 SL? Why? Because they value the things that you see in there: leather seats, climate control, the TriStar, basically the prestige of driving that car. It's a larger car, whatever it is. Right? There's value that gets added around the same functionality, and that's the reason why you create more money that can be made by both sides. So that's the idea. Focusing on one item doesn't create value. So if you do add more spunk to it, if you add some meat to it, it just just creates more value. The second is that if you're only discussing one thing, the possibility of conceding becomes very high. And we would recommend that it just sets a bad precedent, and therefore the more you have to trade, or the wider you can cast the net, the less is the number of times that you're going to have to concede. You must always trade. If you have only one thing to discuss, you can trade nothing. If you have three things to discuss and the customer gets stuck on one of those things, you can trade the others. And I'll build on that as we go forward. So how do we know that a trade is a good trade? A good trade is one that's measured when the return that you get is equal or higher than what the other party gets. Right? And again, I'll expand on this as we get further into the conversation. So instead of having a discussion on the price and the cost to the customer, let's try and take the conversation to the value side, where you can create a higher impact for both the sides. Once again, I'd say customers often don't understand the trades that they can work with. They often just cherry pick. So you've given them 6 things to talk about, and then they will pick one thing out of that, and they'll suddenly say, no, you charge too much, or the other guy gives me the same features at a lower price, or this feature in your product doesn't exist that exists in the other guy's product. So it's on us to educate the customers, and that's the reason why I said that it's always best if you drive the nego. And to drive the nego, you have to be prepared, and you have to have these 2 or 3 strategic levels of depth to have a good negotiation discussion. Once again, the wider we cast the net with respect to who are the stakeholders in the client's organization, and how much flexibility we can create, how much value we can create around the trades, or how much how creative we can be around it, is going to be, the more we can do the more helpful it is in our negotiation. This typically is going to help us a great deal. Doing the trades well is typically going to help us a great deal in ensuring that we stay away from what we call the giveaway pressure. You're discussing one thing, you want to win the deal, your consequence of no agreement, of not winning that deal, is too high, therefore you want to win at all costs. You've not expanded the number of things that you can negotiate or trade with the customer. Customer is putting pressure, you are tempted to give away. Right? And so if you do the trades right and you do the CNAs right, it gives you a fairly good opportunity to not just give away under pressure. Right? But for trades, we need to have a few things, 3 elements in place. First of all, trades need to be measurable. So you'll need a metric. The second is you need a reasonably good range. See, you're not going to find the exact number at which the customer is going to agree. You may also not even know the exact number at which you are willing to do the business. So it's important to have that range. And the third really important point is that what's the prioritization? I don't want to be spending an enormous amount of time negotiating something with a customer that is not on his priority list. Nor do I want to be doing the same thing vice versa. In other words, there's something high on the client's priority list and he's negotiating on it, and I'm becoming inflexible on that. So you need the prioritizing order as well. And it's always a good idea to start building on the trades. One of the mistakes that a lot of negotiators make is that they want to they end up tending to be too shallow. They don't really go deep into the discussions that might get them the 1 or 2 things that are crucial in winning the negotiation. So I think it's important to use the blueprint basically to find out more, and the objective of finding out more about the client and his needs and why is he doing what he's doing is to broaden the conversation and take it as far beyond the one thing that the client wants to discuss as possible, right? And the ways to do that are simple, right? One way is to first of all just try and fundamentally understand if the client even understands what is the consequence in money terms or in opportunity cost terms of what the consequence will be if they don't agree with what we are saying. And that's a great way to that's a great way to just broaden the scope of things that you can discuss. Do discuss interests that are underlying. Why do you do this? What do you see? Or what is the impact of doing something or what is the behavior change that happens? What behavior change do you want to effect by doing whatever you're trying to do? You know, those kind of questions to uncover what's lying underneath the solution that they're trying to achieve. I had a very interesting story, and I'll share it with you. It's from a professor at I think at the University of Lausanne. I forget what it is. It's about a friend of his who lives in Venezuela but has a house in the south of France, and it's a comfortable house. He has a big car, big apartment. You know, car is in the garage, but he also has a small car that he parks out on the street. And he's fed up because the small car has already been stolen twice. So he goes to car showroom, and he asks the salesman that, you know, I'm looking for a solution with mobile technology and, you know, some connection to a specialized company or to the police station to track the car down if it actually gets stolen, and I'm willing to pay you know, several thousand euros extra to buy this car. Now the salesman listens to the potential client's questions carefully, and then he says, you know, we have a car that matches the description that you're talking about, but it's you know, it's really ugly. I mean, it's bright green in color. We've had it for 6 months, but nobody wants to buy it. I think it's the ideal car for you. And you know, the client is surprised, and he says, you know, why are you saying this? And he says, because, you know, simple thing is that car is the way it looks, you can park it anywhere. Nobody's going to steal it. And even if they stole it, the police would find it right away without any kind of mobile technology or radar technology, because there's only one car of that color in the whole of south of France. So basically what happened is that by listening carefully to the client's needs, this person took the client's needs, he took the product that he had, and he created a solution around that that exactly matched what the client needs. And so, you know, the whole negotiation went into, or the whole discussion, the whole sale went into a different area. And we encourage that on the, you know, encourage that depth of discussion on the negotiation side as well. So, you know, that's the point I wanted to make there. Now, why do we care about trades? There are a few points that I want to share with you. You know, the first of those is it creates the value space that we can discuss with our customer. So it grows the value. It increases the pie size, and it's going to ensure that both sides are less and less inclined to fight over or to negotiate over a single point issue, and expand the conversation to a more holistic business solution. Right? So it helps you understand what are the priorities of both the sides, and therefore to focus on the right areas and create you know, create deals as opposed to create you know, create basically a pricing. So that's you know, that's an important aspect to, or those are important aspects to consider when you're looking at trades. Now let's look at the third piece of the strategic depth that we're talking about. That's called multiple solution options, right? Now, one of the things that happens very often in a negotiation, or in fact in any conversation, the first few things that are said usually end up setting the direction for whatever is the end solution that you hammer out. In fact, there's a very interesting quote that I have here, you know, on creating the anchors for the conversation. And this quote says that our minds basically tend to give a very disproportionate weight to the first information we receive whenever we have to make decisions. Now, when you're getting into a negotiation situation, it means that the first impression is the one that's going to govern whatever is the discussion, or strongly contribute to the you know, to the direction that negotiation is going to take, which is very restrictive. And so it's important that we prevent that restrictiveness to come into play and start working on creating more options than one. There's a lot of uncertainty in negotiations, and therefore you've got to manage that uncertainty. We already know what our CNA is, but one of the uncertainties is what is their CNA. Now, we made a good guess, We made a cultured guess based on the data that we've collected, but you can't be 100% sure that it actually hits the nail on the head, right? The second thing that we know is what are our trades, but we don't necessarily know very accurately what their trades are. Again, we've made a guess, we've prioritized them, we've given a range, and all of those things. But there is still, potential that we were not that accurate. And so, for us not to get boxed in, we need to look at, how do we work with their trades the way we have interpreted them, but also potentially in ways that we may have not, or their CNA in the way we have interpreted it, and potentially in a way that we have not. And that's why we say, we should create multiple solution options for the customer based on our understanding of their CNA and our understanding of the analysis of that CNA, as well as understanding of their trades and the priority and range of their trades. So the key points that that we'd like to really make here are that this keeps the conversation really open. It sort of changes the perspective from a single-minded, single-focused approach that any one party might have to a more holistic way of looking at the negotiation discussion. Right? The messaging becomes very consistent. There's a lot of flexibility. There are solutions that are on the table, and therefore one of the things that that we are able to convey to the customer and add value to their add value to the negotiation on their side is to propose multiple solutions and to negotiate each of those solutions. Right? It's also 3 proposals that we are prepared to accept. In my experience as a negotiator, to whatever extent that those negotiations happened, I found that there was an increasing propensity on the on part of the clients to basically throw out the first proposal that we gave, and we then had to go into a huddle and go back into panic mode and create another proposal and go back to the client based on whatever he had said. And there was always a great deal of confusion about, did he like something that we had put in the first proposal that we are not putting in the second one? Did he dislike something in the first proposal that we are continuing to put in the second one? So, and what is it that is acceptable to our business? So, by creating these 3 different proposals, we convey a very clear message. Not only are we prepared to accept, but that we are prepared with what with what we need and what the client needs, and that can only come if your trades and your CNAs are clear from both sides. It will, of course, represent complexity. It will represent resource needs from different angles, and help you probably come out with what's frequently known as the final solution that we get from the negotiation is not your way, it's not my way, but it's a third way, which is a better way, right? And creates the best value for both parties. So and of course it'll end up creating a great deal of alignment. I think one of the key benefits of taking the MSOs is also to help the client become much clearer in what are the go and no-go kind of areas from his side as well as your side. We almost always tend to spend more time on giving customers inputs on from our perspective, but the customer will obviously like to hear more from the perspective of their own business. And as you create these more options, it just helps the customer organize his thinking with both perspectives in place. And of course, there are a couple of other benefits that one can look at, because the customer then has more than one thing to have a look at. I also noticed this to be buying behavior in the predominant set of people. It's not like me to go and put, when I'm going out and buying a shirt, I don't actually ask someone to put 5 shirts in front of me to pick one. I just pick one and say, let me buy it. But that's not normal customer behavior. Most customers will normally want 5 shirts to be put out in front, and evaluate various things: size of collar, shape of collar, color, background, how will the fabric look after it's ironed and washed, and various things that people look at. And that possibility gets opened up in the solutions that that you take, especially when you have more than one solution that you're offering. In the case of the plant, this is only an example. It's very simplistic, but it gives you a single screen to see what does this look like, what could potentially look like. So we might take multiple solution options to the customer who's buying the plant to say, hey, if cost is the only criteria, here's the cost. It's $12 million, right? If you're looking at a new revenue stream to add to your plant, it's 12 million plus 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 whatever value you put to the patents, which in this case is 5 million. The $17 million, you'll make it with the plant as well as an additional revenue stream. Or we can take it up to $20 million, which is plants plus patents plus immediate access. 15 days with the workforce included costs you $20, and you can run the business, from 6 months out, which is how long it's going to take to fit out the plant for your needs. Essentially, what we're doing is we are creating 3 acceptable scenarios for ourselves as well as the client to give him a choice, and the basis for creating these 3 options that the client could pick up from are based on a clear understanding of the consequences of no agreement for both sides and the trades that both sides are willing to make. So you're really creating a menu for the client to pick up from. Right? Why do we care about MSOs? Well, it just creates higher value, more deeper and better quality conversations with the customer. By creating value inside or enhancing the value inside, you'll probably have, it increases the odds of having bigger results and probably getting to them faster, because you're not going to have to go up and down again and again every time the customer wants something new. So you probably get bigger, faster outcomes from creating that. I think this is a very important point. More often than not, negotiators on the selling side are focusing on their business issues. Sellers in the sellers on the negotiating table are focusing on their business issues. If you bring the two together by doing the right level of preparation and bring in our mutual business issues, you're likely to get easier and more impactful results. By doing this, remember there were, in both the CNA and what we need to do with the CNAs and the trade slide, one of the points I had made was that, involve as many stakeholders as trades and CNAs as you can. Because the more people you involve, the greater the impact that begins to be seen on the client side. And the greater the impact, the greater the value to both the sides. And you will obviously come up with a solution that is more acceptable to both sides. Now, these are the 3 pillars. These are the 3 pillars of strategic depth. I think it's important to understand how these translate into the marketplace when you're talking to customers. Here's a classic pattern, some patterns that you see. Why, and what you can do about them. First of all, can you anticipate their tactics? And the second is, why do we have so much trouble in responding to what clients have to say? I mean, clients typically say these kind of things, right? Something's not in my budget. You do it, or we will go to RFP. The competition has advanced technology. You need to lower your price. These are the typical. If you look at the 80-20 sort of rule, Pareto's principle, these are the 20% of the things that you will hear 80% of the time, right? So there's but many of these are really hidden under one fundamental negotiation myth, and that myth is that the customer that I cannot counter as a seller a statement that the customer makes that says I can get the same thing cheaper, because here the customer is talking about 2 things, right? He is talking about the same thing, which means that he has an alternative, that he can go to somebody else to get it. And cheaper means concession. These are the key things. I can get the same thing cheaper. If you've got on top of this stuff, I think, a lot of the, or a method, or a dance to play to when you're faced with these kind of things, then you probably have a much easier time and have much more success in your negotiation than otherwise. So let's go ahead and dissect it, right? Let's have a look at. I can get the same thing cheaper, right? Now, here's potentially something that a client will do. He will take 1 or 2 aspects of your consequences of no agreement totally out of context. Like, for instance, in this case, he's taken this thing out of context. Now, if you understand this, these 2 boxes are your CNAs. This on the seller side, this on the right on the client side. These are my trades, these are the client's trades, right? The client has taken one aspect of his consequences of no agreement, saying that the competition has better technology, and he's taken it out of context and he's trying to place it at a high level. Our skill as negotiators is to figure out that what the client is saying, which in this case is the competition has better technology, is this coming from a CNA or is this coming from a trade? Clearly, this is coming from a CNA. It's not something that I'm trading. It's not a price issue. It's not a it's not an issue of time. It's not an issue of those kind of things. It's just a, you know, what's the total business value that I'm getting at, and that's the that's the entire approach that we want to take. This is a classic opportunity when you face this kind of this kind of an objection from the client, to jump to your CNA model. And what's your CNA model? What's the consequence of no agreement, right? So what is it that, what are the components of that agreement? Let's have a look. 1 minute, just slows down once I move this. Yeah. So you're looking at a situation where you would like to really ask the client to put this circle that you've taken out firmly back in the box, because this is just the nose of the face in this box. Do you want me to give you a different nose? Do you want me to give you a monkey's nose in what's essentially a dog's face? And so I think the good idea here, a great idea here, is to lift this up, is to say how important is that thing that you've picked out that you're objecting to relative to the overall consequence of no agreement. Now, we don't necessarily use those terms, but we know what the CNA is, right? Now, what was the issue here? The issue was, you have technology that's not as good. But the fact is, what if I'm looking at a technology that aligns better with all the other machinery that I already have installed in my, in my factory? Are you going to sacrifice the integration of that as a solution, of getting better technology, newer technology, which is not going to align with and integrate with the older technology that I have in my business? Is that a sensible discussion? Is that a sensible decision, right? Or about effective use of resources, right? We have 20 people that, or 25 people that are trained in this area. By putting in this new technology, are we basically looking at redeployment of those resources somewhere else? Or are we looking at retrenching those resources? What is the overall business context that you're talking in this, talking about this objection in? And that's a great way to go back to your CNA. So if you get a CNA type objection, go right back and expand the conversation by asking a question like, how important is that item relative to others that we've discussed, to bring this, bring this issue squarely back into, into the CNA box. If the customer is, what you're trying to do at this point in time is to see if the customer's CNA has actually gone up or gone down based on the objection that he's made. If the consequence to no agreement has gone up for the customer, he will quietly back off. If the CNA for the customer has not gone down, he will quietly go. But that will only happen if you clearly put the CNA in front of his face, because it's folly for a negotiating seller to assume that the customer understands the CNA. Most of the time he doesn't, right? So if you bring it back into the context and paint the picture back for them in their own words, that's probably a great way to respond to CNA level questions, right? Sometimes customers will pick up trade issues, price. Like for instance, he's now picked out price from this trade issue. No, you've got to lower your price. Customers say that very, very often, right? Now, our opportunity to respond to something like that is to really start looking at doing the trade. There might be a pathway to that. Now, one way of doing that is to ensure that you have more things that you have created, or a wider base of things that you can trade. Because if you've done that, then you can have a conversation with the customer here straight away saying, okay, if you're absolutely insistent that we reduce our price, there might be a pathway to do that by, for instance, reducing the scope of the project, or for instance, reducing the headcount that we want to put in this, or perhaps by taking longer period milestones. Instead of 6 months, using lesser resources, we will deliver this to you in 7 months. We'll be happy to reduce price. Please always trade. It's always a good idea to trade rather than to concede. The moment the customer gets stuck on a trade issue, he could get stuck on this. No, I don't care. You still got to reduce your prices. The moment he gets stuck on the trade issue, you got the strategic depth to go back to the CNA. What's the context that we wanted? What's the context of the solution? Yes, I will reduce price. You're saying I cannot reduce scope, headcount, or milestones. That's fine. But what is the cost of the delay on this? Of this on the whole project? Right. So you now begin to see how you can jump from one point to another point to a third point. If you're getting stuck on the trades, you can jump to another option in the MSOs, or alternately, you can jump to the consequence of no agreement. If the consequence of no agreement has started shifting, you can jump to an option. If one of the multiple options that you've created for the client is not working for him, you could jump to another option, or you could jump to the consequences of no agreement. This is the space that we end up creating for ourselves in keeping a high value and integrated and broad conversation open for the customer, open with the customer on a negotiation, and not allow the customer to box us in a way that he wants to on one specific area. So whatever your tactics are, you could use one or both. When the customer is talking about an alternative, somebody else can do this, right? One guideline that I would like to give is, if the customer is talking about an alternative or a competitor, it's a good idea to bring the whole force of the entire CNA and the impact areas of the CNA into the picture, into the conversation. If the customer is talking about concessions, pricing, for instance, is the concession that they normally talk about both ways. Either take less money or give me more for the same money. Right? That's a great area to start using the multiple trades that you have created and say, right, I can give you this, but this will cost this, this, and this, right? And if you've got the prioritization right on the trades, and you start picking off on things that are low priority for you, you may be willing to do that. Or you pick up on things that are high priority for the customer, you may be able to push the customer back on the concession that he's asking. So now you see the tango between the three assets that you've created. By expanding those assets individually, and by creating those three assets, you just created a huge space for yourself to maneuver in that is on your terms, using your structure and your model to carry forward the negotiation discussion. And that's the reason we find that by using this methodology, you can often get pretty strong results and pretty favorable results. So the blueprinting negotiation is really really in three parts. I'm just summarizing here. The first is the CNA, which defines your position and win-win result. Win-win obviously means also the customer's result. It defines the trades, which expands the value. So if, it's very clear. If two of us have to share 10 rupees, there's only so much we can share. But if we create value and we say, we just created 20 rupees, then we have more stuff to share and both of us can take more. So trades are exactly in that area. And the MSOs are the structure. This is the anchor from which the conversation starts. You can either move between the anchors, change the MSOs, or jump from an MSO to a CNA conversation, or jump from an MSO to a trade conversation, or jump from a trade to a CNA. So this gives you the flexibility and the space to begin the conversation that already envisages all of the things that are important to the customer and to yourself. And it's built using basically just three questions that you need to look at when you're thinking about the blueprint and what you want to build on. For the CNA, the question is, what happens to both sides if we don't agree? For the trades, the question is, what makes a good negotiation for both sides if they do agree? And the question for the MSOs is simple. That question is, how can I create three solutions that are better than their alternatives, the customer's alternatives, that creates a better outcome for both of us? If we've got good, solid answers for these three questions, I think we're going to be in a great shape in getting into negotiations that are not just tactical single-point negotiations, but are strategic multi-point negotiations with a lot of cushioning for ourselves. So that's the total content I had today, and I'm open to any questions now that the audience might have.